Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now you're welcome along. There is much to discuss. We have Heineken Champions Cup semi-finals coming this Saturday. All of a sudden, Racing will host Saracens at La Défense. Toulouse will travel to Sandy Park, where Exeter await. Clearly, as we all know at this stage, no Irish representation. To discuss, we have the Irish Independent's Rory O'Connor. Evening, Rory.
Hey, Joe.
Keith Wood, you're there as well. Good evening.
Hey Joe, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm feeling chastened, Keith. A chastening weekend for us all is the general tone of the conversation on Irish rugby. Let's start with Saracens Leinster. What do you do if you're in that front row and it's penalty after penalty after penalty and you feel like you're being pushed back at every moment?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of fun when that happens. And for me, I thought de Kock was very excellent, actually. And all you can do is bring it as low as you possibly can, and there was an element of movement inside in that scrum, and you're watching it from the outside and watching Cian Healy being put under huge pressure because there was not a slipped bind, but going in across the scrum, and if the referee lets you get away with it, you do it, and we all, that's actually what you're aiming for, is to be able to get yourself into a stronger position. I felt as if Leinster didn't fully take, I'm going to say they didn't take it that seriously, that sounds wrong, but at scrum time, if you were the front row, you would be demanding everybody get down low, get ready for the push, flankers on, number 8 on, especially if you're under pressure. But I felt there was a fair bit of crabbing going on, but I would have gone lower. I think at a lower level, they're in a better position, because if big pressure comes on, it collapses, and then it's kind of a 50-50 call almost. When you're up in the air and going back, or crumpling going back, there's pretty much nothing you can do. So you could complain and discuss it with the referee and see whatever happens, but they looked like they were bullied for, in scrum time, and they won't be happy with that one bit. And but I just, it seemed to be a statement for me. You could break it down to that as being one part of the game, and yes, it led to a lot of penalties and a lot of points to be kicked, but it felt, and this is a dreadful thing to say, and it's, but Saracen looked unbelievably hungry. They looked as if everything in their whole life depended on this game, and there was a period of time with about 5 minutes, with about 10 or 15 minutes to go, when players who'd been on for 60, 70 minutes were going at 1,000,000 miles an hour to make hits, piling into rucks. Their level of hunger and attitude on the field, so they looked buoyant all the time, and Leinster looked almost shell-shocked.
And just to pick your brain in another moment on the scrum, whatever about Andrew Porter, who's still developing, somebody as experienced as Cian Healy, the solutions you proposed there, I presume must have occurred to him. Sean Cronin similarly. The point has been made elsewhere as well that Kelleher is by all accounts a better scrummager, or better in the scrum than Sean Cronin. I don't know to what extent that is true. Did you see that front row try and get lower and do those things that you were suggesting?
There's a couple of others. You go from the hooker to attack the tight head. So instead of attacking the hooker, you try and drop your bind some small bit, your right arm, and try and head out towards the tight head to offset it and to make certain it's easier for your loose head. I don't know. I think it works as a unit, front row and whole pack. Doesn't just go down to one player to whether they've done it or haven't done it. But I didn't see them adjusting as much. But I actually thought, and this is now as if we're blaming Leinster, I have to say I thought the Saracens pack were phenomenal, truly phenomenal, and I thought they buckled under the pressure, and they didn't seem. I think they were tried a few different things and tried to offset the scrums a couple of times themselves, but it didn't seem to matter on Saturday what they did, because Saracens just looked fully geared up to chase after it themselves, and they chased it up on the tight head side on a couple of occasions. And I mean, it was just huge pressure. You could see the huge pressure going in all along. It's funny because I've read a lot of the articles since, and some people say, well, some of that's cheating and some of that was was wrong and the referee gave it in the wrong direction. The referee tends to penalise the team that is under the most pressure. That's what tends to happen now. And Leinster were under pressure for nearly every single scrum.
And then, Rory, very few teams can turn the screw when they have an advantage like that, like Saracens, and the scoreboard just ebbed away from Leinster. I mean, it was kind of quintessential Cup rugby. 9 minutes, Saracens went 6-3 up. 13 minutes, it was 9-3. 25 minutes, it's 12-3. Suddenly, on 28 minutes, Leinster are looking at 15-3. And that's really tricky territory. And then Good scores the try, and I think we all felt the game was over at half-time. Leinster probably came back more than many suspected they would in the second half. So your perspective on that first half, because I know when you were all speaking to Leo Cullen afterwards, he used the word spooked several times.
Yeah, and I think, the starting point for all this should be that Saracens were excellent and performed brilliantly and brought a lot more than I thought they would, given who they were missing and the fact that Owen Farrell was suspended. I certainly didn't see that performance coming to the same extent. I thought they would be full of passion and would bring something, but I didn't think over 80 minutes they'd be able to do it. So if you start off with that starting point and say, yes, Saracens were excellent and fully deserved their win, I do think Leinster could have done a lot more to prevent them from winning the game. And, one thing, I wouldn't have the same scrum knowledge as Keith. I would say that maybe you don't give them as many scrums. So, when they win a scrum penalty and kick the points from the halfway line pretty much, don't kick the restart straight out. Kick the restart 10 metres and challenge for it. Don't make as many mistakes. I mean, you could say that Saracens' pressure. I mean, it's kind of the trite thing to say that the reason Leinster made so many mistakes was Saracens' pressure. And in some instances that is correct, and Maro Itoje was exceptional. But a lot of Leinster's mistakes were their own mistakes. They weren't necessarily under pressure when they made them. I mean, no one was on Johnny Sexton for that restart. I still can't understand why, a skill that he nails, 9 times out of 10 in these big matches seems to go awry when the team come under pressure. I mean, that is a major concern for Ireland and Leinster. And I think that while Saracens brought it, Leinster didn't bring it. And I think these teams are not. I think there is a big gulf between Ireland and England at the moment, but I don't think there's that much of a gulf between Leinster and Saracens. And I think if these teams met again on Saturday, I think Leinster will be able to tidy up an awful lot of those areas. The scrum maybe is the biggest challenge without Tadhg Furlong, but I think they played. If you look at Saracens 23, Leinster should have known that Saracens probably didn't have 80 minutes in them. So to hand them that many ins into the game, to make that many mistakes, if they kept it tight for 50, 60 minutes, they would have won the game because they had the better bench. They finished much stronger. They were much better in the second half. But I think they may have focused too much on ball carrying and not enough on the tight five stuff. And it was their maul and their they fixed their line out, but their scrum collapsed. Their defensive maul was very poor. I think they've got some very good athletes in that pack. They maybe just need to get a far bigger focus and maybe become a bit more boring during the Pro 14 so that when it comes to it, their maul is able to stand up against this higher caliber opposition and their scrum as well. I think they need to be, just a destructive, dominant force at Pro 14 level, so that when they come up against teams of this caliber, they could step up.
But the point has been made, Rory, that they are more powerful than most teams in the Pro 14.
Yeah, but that's just a fact, and they made it through a fairly cup. They won 25 out of 25, and were correctly lauded for it, and it was an incredible achievement, and incredible consistency, using I think 54 players over the course of the 2 seasons that happened. All they can do is train against each other and play against the teams they're put against. There's only one Saracens out there, and they're not going to play Saracens for the next 2 years. Lyon were the French team they got, who were a tough team and dragged them into a bit of a dogfight, but they had the class to get past them. I mean, all they can do is dominate teams and try and replicate that intensity in training. There's nothing they can do to replicate that in the Pro 14 because until the other South African teams come in, there's not that profile of team in the league. So. I think it's fair to criticise the Pro 14, but I don't think you can say Leinster lost because of the Pro 14. I think Leinster have what it takes to beat Saracens on a given day, but their performance must be put down more to their own inability to bring it on the day than anything else.
Keith, one of the reasons this is so dispiriting for Leinster is they lose the final at St James's Park last year. They go and win the next 25 matches in Europe and domestically as well, and then this is their shot at redemption. This is, they go through all those games to get back to this point and lose again in such an emphatic way. And it's I suspect really tricky for everyone to pick up and go again into the next season with huge enthusiasm. Like that, the two big tests they have failed. So the point was made there about the Pro 14 and Leinster playing under pressure. As you know, as someone who's been there and done it, do you put much stock in the point that Leinster, as a group, are unaccustomed regularly to playing under pressure, and so when it comes on from a Saracens, things go awry the way they did? Some of the issues Rory mentioned.
I think that could be part of it. I mean, I looked at the game and I looked at the level of intensity that Saracens brought to the game, and I felt that their forwards were faster, more aggressive in the carry, and I think that it doesn't mean that Leinster have to be like that, or Munster have to be like that, or any of the Irish teams have to be like that. They just need to be able to deal with it. And maybe there was, I wouldn't call it complacency, but I was trying to figure out that all the chat had been, and for myself as well, all the chat had been that Saracens were without Owen Farrell, with 10 internationals missing from the last time they played, could hardly be up to scratch for this. You wouldn't have known it to look at the attitude of the players. So I would have said that's the best Saracens have played in 12 months. And so they managed to get their emotional peak exactly right. And for them, they knew everything had to be right. And that's how they went to play. So you could talk about unit skills falling apart, mistakes. And just for Rory's point, pressure and huge pressure plays a huge amount on players' minds if they haven't been under it. To hear Leo say spooked, that's what it looked like for me. There was also the view that if you give away a penalty inside in the opposition half, that Elliot Daly was able to pop it over the points. The Saracens didn't have to get into Leinster's half to score. That rarely happens as well. And suddenly it drifts away from you. And then you're looking at the players who we call great athletes because they are great athletes. They were great 2 weeks ago. They were great this week. They are. But some of them don't have the level of experience to play in these huge, big games and haven't played in them before, or have only tasted loss in them before. And that takes a bit of getting used to too. So I don't write off the Pro 14 after it. I absolutely don't. And nor do I say that the Premiership in England is so much better. I think there are teams in the Premiership that are better. And can play a cracking style of rugby. And if you look at Exeter playing at the weekend, they're just a joy to watch in how they play. And so no, I don't think you write it all off. Though I do think that there are elements of the Pro 14 that aren't anywhere near good enough, and that's been a work in progress for a long time. There's a lot more conversations on that at the moment, how to make it better, but I'm not even sure if that's the right way either. For me, it was like, it's a horrible thought for a team to think that another team would like it more or wish for it more or want it more. But you could see the level of hunger on the Saracens players. I thought Itoje was brilliant, Rhodes was brilliant, George was brilliant. You know, the effort that they put in, and they weren't taking guys off after 60 minutes. They were looking for another 10, 15, 20 minutes from them. And they wanted it that much. This is a team that has been fully backed into a corner, that have got the sanctions of everything that have been put down on them, that are vilified all the time in the press, that have a chip on their shoulder because of how they've been treated, because they felt they hadn't done anything wrong. And this was their one and only opportunity to go and deliver it. So they had one focus and one focus only. Now, Leo could say that was the same for Leinster, but it wasn't. You know, they wanted to make certain they could do everything else, and whether they took certain things for granted or not, I don't know. But it didn't. That level of pure hunger didn't seem to be there. But for me, I think you end up with a coaching ticket who looks at this and say, okay, we got this wrong, this wrong, this wrong. Some players didn't operate under pressure. They may have made a few selection calls that they wouldn't make again the next time. They'll learn an awful lot from it. It's frustrating because we want to be looking at the semi-final weekend, and we're not. Well, we're looking from afar.
Yeah, and it's the season, you know. And if you're a Johnny Sexton, for instance, I mean, it's a valuable season tossed away now suddenly, and will feel very disappointing. I just want to broaden this out then to Irish rugby generally, and the power game was obviously much discussed as well, and England-Ireland matches have gone a certain way, and Leinster-Saracen matches of late have gone a certain way. And we had Stuart Barnes on the show on Monday with Liam Tolan. Liam was, you know, talking about if we draw a line from 2019 and the World Cup, and this sense we need to play a different brand of rugby is an issue, and you'll hear Stuart Barnes address that. But first of all, I put it to him, you know, looking in, total neutral. We talk about Leinster's dominance in the Pro 14, and we celebrate it every week. You know, we talk about Josh van der Fleer making 1,000 tackles a match and how great, you know, the statistics are. But actually, on the back of these two performances against Saracens, maybe that is an indictment of the Pro 14 more than a celebration of Leinster's brilliance. And I asked him, frankly, is there just a level of delusion about ourselves over here?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a little bit like National Hunt, you know. A couple of small yards in England have a horse that rattles off 4 or 5 big hurdles wins, and they look great, and they go to Cheltenham, and then it's Ireland has all the big guns. Form line's very important. It has not helped Leinster winning all their games, and I think I was looking at the score lines. It was something like a 21-point margin average. You know, this is huge. This is not the sort of background preparation you need to play big teams. And I'm not an Anglocentric sort of person who likes to kick Pro 14. I love rugby. You know, I want to see it good everywhere I see. But what I've seen is over the last over years, a lack of ambition and accuracy in the English League. In Ireland, in the Pro 14, more flair, but a lot less power. And I go all the way back to Liam, saying, well, what do we do about that? And saying how Japan showed the way. Japan's way was to play with great accuracy, but at real pace. Now, if you look at Ireland, there isn't real pace. And in the World Cup, there was no pace. They played offloading, but it was slow as you like, and it was hopeless. And you take the power analogy, the one team who are not huge at international level are New Zealand. And how have they, in the 20-odd years of professionalism, dominated test match after test match as they do? Because the speed and the accuracy and the width of their game is like nothing else from any team. And that reflects on why New Zealand are a hard team to beat. They don't have the biggest, but they understand if you don't have that, you have to play outside power. Ireland can't do that because Ireland don't have the pace or the willingness to play outside power.
That was Stuart Barnes on Monday. Full chat is waiting for you on the OTB Sports app. So, Keith, let's broaden that point out with Twickenham very shortly in mind for Ireland and this, you know, issue with the power game of late.
Yeah, it's insightful, I think. And I think when things are going very well for us, which we did 2 or 3 years ago when we were absolutely on fire, we were playing a very specific game plan that required everybody to follow every component part of it. And when it worked and worked very well, we were pretty much unbeatable, and we were for a year pretty much, and beat everybody. But when people decided to shut that down and we didn't get the space or the scope to it, we seem to, and I think we'll see this quite a lot, we tend to rely on more, I think nearly a more blinkered version of rugby. So we take it into contact a little bit too quickly, too often, without setting up space. We don't operate at a fast pace. So for the part, I do like his criticism because it stings, and we want it to sting because we don't ever want to hear that sort of comment coming across the pond. You know, that's not a nice place. But I would like his honesty as well. I've always liked Barnsley's view on rugby, in that he just calls it as he sees it, and he doesn't have to kind of dance around anything with it either. So I think we were, since the start of 2019, we became much more predictable. We were put under far more pressure, and it isn't about passing the ball to the wings every minute of every second, but it is about mixing it up an awful lot. And actually we noticed over the last couple of weeks that Munster against Leinster and Leinster against Munster in that game, and then Leinster against Saracens, we tried to play a style that was Not low chance of error, maybe, that we didn't attack in as much as we could have attacked. Now, Saracens' defensive display was incredible, and we need to have a style of play that takes some of that power away from the defending team. So that's exactly what happened to us, Ireland against England, where their pure power put us under pressure. So our game has to operate outside of that pressure. I don't know what that is. But it could be going back to kicking along the ground. It does go back to kicking at times, because if you're under that much pressure, but it also comes back to having huge security in your ball carrying. It also comes back to carrying the ball with a level of momentum. Having players truck the ball up from a standing start or a one-step start means it's very hard to get fast ball with it. It's actually great when you're playing down the levels, but the second you get up to the highest level, you're under pressure all the time. So how do we generate fast ball? Is it on ruck time? How do we generate it from ball carriers using their feet going into contact? Because we're not as big as some of the teams we're playing against. There's no point trucking it straight up into somebody. They'll just stop you dead. But how can we use areas of variation? How can we guarantee that ball is not turned over? How can we make that really, really fast? I think it's hard to make it fast if you're thinking of kicking it, because it slows everybody down. They know that if we don't get 3 phases or 4 phases significantly over the gain line, we go to kick the game and kick the ball. And that just then becomes a philosophy of slowing things down. But again, I'd go back to Saracens' defensive line, and the defensive hits were incredible. The technique was incredible. But the quality of the hit was incredible. So you have to unsettle that somehow, and that could be the dribble that we've seen from Leinster over the last few weeks on the ground to turn them. But then you have to flood in to do it. Saracens did that against Leinster. Leinster didn't do it anywhere near as much. And look, I'm happy with the words that Leo Collins said. They look spooked. And I think they'll learn an awful lot from it. They'll be really hurt. You'd like to say they'd be hurt for the whole summer, which is what normally happens. But they'll be hurt for the next week, and then they have to get back on the horse again and figure it out. So there's a lot of onus on the coaches, a lot of onus on the national coach.
In the meantime, Rory, I mean, those coaches will have really until next springtime to try and come up with a solution, and they're not going to have to deal with Saracens, as you rightly say, again for some time. It's over to you, Andy Farrell. Like, it's Twickenham, as Keith alluded to. The solution is not easy here. I mean, we look at the Scots, I think, and think, well, ultimately we'll overpower them, we'll get through that game. That's generally, I think, how we approach those games. And more often than not, it goes that way. So Andy Farrell going to Twickenham, even going to Paris in the immediate term in the Six Nations. What does he come up with?
Well, it's got to be a long-term plan as well. I mean, we can't get bogged down. Like, if we're going to learn from 2019 and the fact that we had an incredible World Cup cycle and a terrible World Cup, then we've got to give Andy Farrell the time to invest in the players of the right profile that he thinks can fix this problem. And I think I would encourage him to go and pick Ryan Baird, for example, and give him as much experience of playing against Maro Itoje as possible. Get Thomas Ahern from Munster on board in time when he's got a bit of Munster experience under his belt, because these are the players who have the power that can live in the company that we're talking about. But he also, I mean, Enda McNulty left at the end of 2019 after the World Cup, after David Nucifora talked about performance anxiety. Now, Leo Cullen dismissed it when I asked him about it. But if he's talking about his team being spooked by this opponent, and in particular, I think Itoje is in the Irish heads right now, there's got to be some body of work done on the mental side of things for these players. Like, Johnny Sexton makes more mistakes against this opponent, unforced ones, than he does against others. I think that's just something that they're going to have to interrogate. If Sexton is the man that's going to lead us forward in the next one or two, maybe longer, I don't know, years, well, then they've got to ask him what's going on and fix it. If James Ryan is coming off second best against Itoje, even though he's the player that we all want to build the pack around, he's only a year younger than Itoje, but Itoje is clearly at the moment the better player. Not to say that Ryan's not a very, very good player. They'll probably be the line second row, but Itoje is probably the best second row in the world right now. Maybe a few South Africans would dispute that. So there's a mental challenge for Andy Farrell to address. I think he's already started working on the physical challenge. I think, You know, I think Caelan Doris will come into the equation. I think Ryan Baird, I think Ronan Kelleher, Dave Heffernan down in Connacht. I think he will pick players based on their ability to win collisions. But him and his coaches need to get that maul right, get that scrum fixed completely. Obviously, you need to get Tyke Furlong back into the mix. Hopefully, his back clears up. And maybe you get Dan Levy back. He's back on Friday, hopefully, in this A game against Ulster. And he gives you that warrior spirit that maybe both teams are missing at the moment. I think Leinster's problems are far less than Ireland's in terms of, I still think Leinster are one of the favourites to win next year's Champions Cup. They're still one of the best teams in Europe. I think they could have, if they played again this weekend, they could beat Saracens. But I think Ireland against England is a very different one. And it's beneficial that he has this kind of behind closed doors, relatively low stakes trip to Twickenham in a couple of weeks. I think the more Ireland play against England, it could be so damaging psychologically, but the more they get time to figure it out, the better, because the more these players play against those opposition players, the better. But they've got to cut out the errors. Like, you know, I don't think we ever saw Leinster's game plan on Saturday because they made too many mistakes, and that's Saracens wanted a slow game with the ball out of play for a long period of time. You know, Leinster lost it twice. They came back in the second half, and I thought Saracens were dead on their feet with 15 minutes to go. Then Gary Ringos chases down the kick and Wigglesworth and puts them in touch, and then Leinster throw to the front and give up another scrum. Like, the last thing they needed was to give Saracens a break and a scrum to get their energy back. The Irish players need to be smarter. They need to be tactically more aware, and I think Farrell will start picking more physically gifted players, but he needs to work on the mental side of it as well from their point of view.
Yeah, the mistakes thing is very interesting. Like, you couldn't really admire Johnny Sexton more on or off the pitch. You know, he has been amazing, and yet even as you were talking about the mistakes on the bad days, you think of the Grand Slam game against Wales. Well, it was Wales's Grand Slam game in the rain, and Keith, you know, it was like just inexplicable the way Sexton managed to play that day. And we've been making mistakes really for, right through 2019. How much wiggle room does Farrell have with these games? So there's France, Italy is first, and that'll be fine, you would think. So it's Paris away, and then Twickenham and Wales. It's hard to know how important they are. Is he given free rein to experiment and look, if you lose all 3 or 4, but we give it a good try, not to worry. I mean, he's going to be very keen, I would think, from a personal point of view, to not be heading into Christmas of 2020 with an abysmal losing record behind him. We're talking about experimentation. There's only so much license afforded to any coach, not least by the media and all the noise that goes with it.
There is, and actually some of the issue we have are that some of the production line of players isn't very deep. So our scrum halves haven't shone a huge light in the last period of time. They haven't been flying it. I think Johnny was off on the weekend. Who are the other guys that are going to step in? Do you start building a team? You have to look at these games as they are. But do you take the view that this is a competition that's important and we still have a chance to do something in the Six Nations? So we should.
What do you think?
I think we should look and see how the first couple of games go and how strong a position it puts us to win the tournament, because you want to win tournaments. That's the reason you're in it. So you don't just kind of stop in the middle and say, well, we're not worried about that. I think you go all out to try and win it. I think that's incredibly important. If that ceases to be the case, you then have to try and say, well, is now the right time to blood a few players? Yeah. Do we take a look and say, like Rory mentioned, the cycle, do we take a look at it and see that who are the players that we have that are going to be playing in the World Cup in the next World Cup, and how do we manage those players to give them the level of expertise that we need? Because I think at times we hold on to our players too long, and we need to make certain that that is not the case, because we don't want to peak again in the midst of it. Can I just say, this is a kind of interesting conversation to have, because there were so many times in our history when we couldn't peak at all, and yet Irish teams have peaked. And so since 2009, with a couple of Grand Slams, with a few championships, with great victories over other ones, we're now used to that as being an idea that we can beat people. But ultimately, we want to get ourselves to win a World Cup. That has to be the goal of an international team, and we have never got past the quarterfinals. So they're the things that we have to try and do. So whatever we could do to make us peak at that period of time, everybody else is trying to do the same thing. But at the present moment in time, I think we're being bullied a little bit by some of the more powerful teams, and I disagree with Rory that we have to build up to play the power game. I think we will always have powerful players. Some countries will have more than we have because of the genetics of that country. Or they're much larger countries, they're going to have it. I don't know that we necessarily have to go down the line to fully play a powerful game. I actually don't think we've the physique for it, but we need to be playing very smart, and we need to up our skill level across the board so that when we are under that level of pressure, that we're okay with it. But look, I still think it's a shock when you look at Leinster. I expected Leinster to play at a much higher performance. They weren't allowed, but equally well, they were spooked.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think we can play a power game. I just think we need to be able to live with the power game, and I think that's what Andy Farrell is working towards by picking. I think the two words he used when he announced the squad for the Six Nations was dynamic and athletic were the two words that kept coming up over and over again. I think that's the profile of player he's going for, and I presume he wants to upskill them as well. But there's other things, I think, skills and also having a second distributor. We need someone who takes the pressure off Johnny Sexton. I mean, you got to come back to, like, everyone knows that Ireland are going to play off 10 and everything goes through Johnny. They need a fullback who can play the game, who can come in and take the pressure off. They need a 9 who can take the pressure off as well. I mean, Luke McGrath had a poor game on Saturday. That just heaps more pressure on Johnny Sexton. I think when it comes to the coming internationals, the two Six Nations games are important, but the ones that come after that, it's a COVID Cup. I don't think anyone's going to remember who wins this tournament. I think it is an opportunity to make a few changes and to try a few things. You don't get, it's six internationals in 7 weeks. So even from a player welfare point of view, we're going to have to see. I'd say we'll see 60. I don't know, maybe not 60, but we'll see a lot of players play for Ireland in that period. And that might cheapen it a little bit, but that's the reality of the situation we're in. That there is a Six Nations coming in a couple of weeks' time after it's finished as well.
Yeah. Okay. The clock is right against us. So Ulster fans, before you come at me, we did talk Ulster on Monday, and we will absolutely check in with Dan McFarland in the next week or so. Stuart Barnes and Liam Tolan did talk about that game though on Monday. I wanted to broaden this chat out into more of an Irish discussion from an international point of view, and we'll come back to the Bernard Laporte story as well in the coming days. Plenty of rugby slots over the coming weeks. We don't have Irish involvement in the Champions Cup to talk about. So for the time being, Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent, thanks very much, and Keith Wood, thanks very much as well. Evening, fellas.
Thanks, Dad. Cheers.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.